Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Noa. I'm here with Brandon Rice and Jake Putich, and we're coming to you via the Looking for Overland blog, available at yespeak.com. That's short for youngevangelicalspeak.com. I tell them that at a certain point, we're going to have to take the young off the website. We're here today to discuss the film Noah, directed by Darren Aronofsky, that's been released here in the United States last weekend. I think it's safe to say it's caused a bit of a stir, a bit of an explosion, certainly in the Christian community, the evangelical Christian community in the United States, to the point where I felt that a discussion between some people with insight and perspective on the issues might be more beneficial than just an article or a review, which I was asked to write. So I asked Brandon and Jake here with me, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves one at a time, and I'd like for them to give us their thoughts and their impressions of the film that they saw, sort of absent the controversy. Just what did they experience? Jake, why don't we let you go first, and then we'll go to Brandon.
Again, my name's Jake. I am a recent graduate of Talbot Theological Seminary, which is Biola's seminary. Got a master's degree in theology. Doesn't mean I'm an expert on things, but I'm glad to kind of give my input on this movie, my thoughts on it. I actually really enjoyed the film. I don't know that I was expecting to, but I really did. I thought it was an incredible spectacle from many vantage points. I particularly loved the creation accounts, the way that it was unfolded in the special effects and different things like that. I thought it was really well done. I liked the human story at the core of everything that was going on. I thought that was really, really effective. Although I can see why a lot of Christians do take issue with it, though I think they might be, spoiler, I think they might be a little misguided in their criticisms of the movie. But for overall, I really enjoyed the film.
Brandon?
Hi, my name is Brandon Rice, and I did not graduate seminary, but I am a filmmaker myself. I've worked on several different Christian films and also non-Christian films, even though I'm a Christian myself. And I am just a regular guy, just went to the movie with an open mind, tried to leave the criticisms that I had heard about the film at home, if you will, and went into it. I knew that the director was not a believer. You know, that obviously was something that was in my mind when I watched it. But at the same time, I realized that he had inadvertently, whether or not it was in his intention, made a film that had a lot of truth in it. I did have some issues with some of the film, but overall, and as Jake said, it was well done. Unfortunately, a lot of Christian films can't be said to have been well done, but this one, though made by a non-Christian and based on the Bible, was well done. And I think that helped me get sucked into the movie, not to a point where I completely turned off what I knew to be theologically sound, but to a point where I got what the Bible was trying to speak to me as opposed to maybe the director was trying to speak to me. And I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but because he used the Bible as source material, I feel like that overpowered even his intent in many ways.
Well, I'm Daniel Noa. I'm a filmmaker. That's really my only claim to be able to speak on this topic. I am a Christian, certainly. I've read the Bible. I was thinking about this today. I know I've read it in its entirety twice. I've probably read portions of it many more times than that. But I don't. It's not really something we keep track of, which is interesting. Because I feel like any other book, you would keep track of that.
Cover to cover.
You'd know. Like you'd be like, well, I read that book 3 times, and okay, you know. But I love the film. You know, I've been very in my zeal to sort of solicit opinions from others. I've been very quiet about my own feelings on the movie. I did say, I think I made a comment when I saw it that I was in tears and I wept repeatedly throughout the film. So I definitely think it's a moving film. It's a well done film, beautifully shot and rendered film, beautifully written film. You know, I think that the drama in the movie is very real. It's interesting when I hear people sort of discount some of the drama and some of the conflict of the film as unrealistic or something like that. And I go, I don't see that. I think it's very realistic. I think this movie gets human beings now, thousands of years ago, human beings as we are, without the particular trappings of a particular point in time or a particular struggle or a particular cause, our essence and our character. And in the context of the film, and as a Christian, I believe in reality, humanity as opposed to God, as a sinful people, sinful, meaning just completely opposed to God. It's the definition, the essential definition. And to me, the film, it was undeniable from pretty early on in the movie, and the way it was depicted, the way people were depicted, I was afraid of them. You saw these hordes of people coming, violent, rabid, unreasoning, they killing at will, taking what they wanted, trading women for, food, just like it was nothing, like it was a necklace, like it was a trinket. All of those things made me afraid. And then thinking about, of course, by the time the flood comes, I'm totally comfortable with God killing all those people. And then yet there's this group of people inside the ark, the fate of any particular one, it seems like, how dare anyone threaten or suggest that, they shouldn't survive. Well, why not? Noah makes a very good argument for sort of that self-awareness of saying, well, we're not perfect. We're not, we're sinful, and he confronts his wife and they have this great discussion about that. And I think he's absolutely right. If you're just talking about justice and deserving and, what should be, like, there is no argument you can make for the survival of any character in that film. Their survival is a pure act of mercy. It's a pure act of graciousness and acceptance. And I think that's such a enormous part of the entire Bible and beautifully displayed in that film.
Yeah, the dialectic of justice and mercy seems to weave its way throughout the entire film, and you see it. You see it really in Noah's struggle at the end of the film, particularly.
We're going to discuss. Yeah. We are going to discuss spoilers. There'll be probably a short spoiler-free version, but for the sake of this, you are warned from this point out. Spoilers.
When he's faced with the choice of killing Elah's two daughters, you can see that it would be just to do so, but mercy is given in his hands as well, and he chooses mercy, and I think there's a sense in which God chose Noah in this film particularly because he knew that Noah would choose mercy. And I think that is the story of God with his creation in many ways. It is a story of the dialectic of justice and mercy. And he is just, but he is also abundantly merciful. And so I think in a sense it does capture the essence of God's interaction with creation and in a very poignant way. One that I think, gets there in ways that maybe some conservative evangelicals are concerned with, and maybe rightfully so. But I think all the same, it does accurately convey that relationship that God has with his creation.
And to that point, Jake, didn't you feel like when you watched the movie, and again, spoiler alert big time, but when he went to kill the girls, and maybe we're jumping too far ahead, but when he said, I can't do it because of the love I have in my heart, didn't you feel, and maybe as a Christian, I connected the dots, maybe someone who wouldn't, but I felt like, well, yeah, because that's the love God gave you. Because
there's that beautiful song that they sing throughout about a father's love being a healing wind. And I think, as much as that is maybe a story about earthly fathers, I think it's more talking about the Heavenly Father.
Right,
and,
like there's
and
a
how,
parallel there.
That's what God is doing, the Creator is doing in this movie. He's providing a healing wind for his creation. And it's an interesting kind of lens to look at the flood through. because it looks like utter destruction. It looks like apocalypse. But in essence, it's God cleansing. And I think Aronofsky really kind of captured that in his portrayal of the story in this film.
Noah makes that point early in the film with Methuselah. He's like, fire destroys, but water cleanses.
Exactly.
He makes that, just even for, obviously for all of us, but for maybe people who aren't familiar with the story, justifying, well, why a flood? Because we kind of take it for granted. We know the story, but
Right.
you come into it, God's going to destroy the earth. Well, flood, like there are much more effective ways
Right,
of,
right.
killing everybody, more efficient,
When I mentioned that line to somebody after I had seen the film, they said, I never thought about it like that. Like, that's true. It wasn't an utter destruction of everything. It was a sort like a cleansing, like a reset, if you will. You know what I mean? And I think that that's truly what it was and what it was meant to be. And I think it was a wake-up call, which I think this movie as a whole is a wake-up call in and of itself, as you pointed out earlier, Daniel, to show people are utterly sinful and there is no hope. And the only problem I had with the movie is it didn't make the final connection of where the hope lies.
Well, and I mean, I guess my question is, do you feel like a story, you're making a movie about Noah. If I was to make a movie about Noah, I'm a Christian, and maybe I don't, like I've said this on Facebook. I said, I'm very comfortable saying that the movie I saw is probably not how it happened. Like, I don't feel any hesitation to say that's probably not how it happened.
In terms of the historical
just all of it, just the way the story unfolded, literally, like if I were to go back in a time machine and I showed up and I'm like, oh, this wasn't like the movie. That would be a stupid thing to say.
Right.
So I am totally there as far as anybody who wants to kind of make that point.
I think all of us agree this is obviously an artistic rendering of the story of Noah, and we're fine with that, I think is what I would say. I'm not offended by that in any way. In fact, I think it brought out things that maybe the typical story of Noah, if it were just presented in the traditional way, the way it's presented in the text of Scripture, if it was presented in that way, it might not illumine some of the facets that it did.
Well, certainly, somebody made a point to me on Facebook, Phil Lawler, shout out, that the biblical text is actually told from God's perspective. It's
to a point. It does vary.
Well, it varies, but it talks a lot about God looked down and he saw.
Towards the beginning, during the actual segment of the flood itself, it is very much told from the perspective of Noah and his family, and it only tells you what happens to them. The only point at which it breaks that is in Genesis 8:1, where it says God remembered His covenant with Noah, and then from then on, once they exit the ark, once again it's told from God's perspective. But while on the ark, it's a very human perspective, which is really interesting, I think. And I think that Aronofsky really captured that.
No, because there are elements in the text that are the sort of the drama of the text is not in the movie, right? Where in the text, the drama comes from he's sending the raven out and he didn't come back, and he sends the dove, and it's like there's some tension there. I think that he sort of acknowledges that the movie-going audience already sort of assumes the story has to end in such a way that we all make it. You know what I mean? like that's kind of in there already. Well, even though that is still where the drama comes from, ultimately. Right? If the children are going to die, and that's but I think that is a much more heightened form of drama that you're more likely to kind of put at the back of your mind what you know is going to happen in the face of that. Whereas if we're just waiting to see what some birds find, most of us are just going to be like, well, we know they're going to find land.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess yes, we know what's going to happen, but there is the question of whether this takes place in the future, which I know some people have posed that question. I
don't agree. I don't think that's a fair. Just the way the movie presents itself, 10 generations from Adam, the garden.
Exactly.
To set that because they're very literal about those things in the movie.
There's a few hints about it maybe being a future-oriented sort of story.
Well, there's some visual cues.
Yeah, exactly.
The montage of the soldiers, which I took just as
the perpetuation of the sin of
man.
Cain.
It's man. This is us. Like. You just watched the history of humanity in a nanosecond.
Yeah, and it's continually perpetuating what Cain did to Abel.
And I think that was it wasn't a dream. It was his telling the story when he tells the story.
It was telling the story.
To the
it
children.
was in the ark when he was telling the story.
Which, by the way, I want to make that point. Now, I really liked the placement of the creation narrative in the film.
It happens almost twice.
Well, they open with it a little bit, but it's very vague. It's very sort of what you might expect
condensed,
when you know, as the intro to a movie.
Yes.
And you're kind of like, we're gonna leave that behind. Like,
Yeah.
you know, the Ten Commandments actually opens with a brief, very brief description of creation, and it's kind of forgotten. It sort of contextualizes the movie, but it's not really relevant.
Right.
Whereas in this film, you get that little bit of context, but then the story progresses,
Right.
and then the flood is happening. And Noah is sitting there listening to the screams of the dying.
Yeah. That was a really, really powerful moment,
Yes.
I thought.
And his children and his wife are begging him, you know, like, we can help them. We can, you know, let's do something. And he says, no, let me tell you a story. And he tells them the creation story in detail. And it's a good chunk of the movie. And his point, I believe, and the point of its placement is to explain to his children, and by extension the audience, the justification for why a God or you know, a being who created this world has the right to make this decision. And justifying to his children and the audience the case for why, you know, this being, this creator, can do this.
Yeah.
And this is not something that we should obstruct, that he has made this decision, which plays into, as the story progresses, when he's like, you undermine the creator.
Yeah.
That's his accusation.
Yeah.
He's like, you went to him, you asked for his blessing, you know,
Yeah.
which I actually like throughout the movie, there's this sort of idea, which I saw criticized in an article, that he depicted Adam and Eve as these glowing things. And obviously, I don't know that I believe Adam and Eve glowed. I don't. But I do like this idea that there was something about the nature of man that was lost in the fall.
Well, I mean, even if, you know, let's come at this from a Christian perspective. If you look at the transfiguration of Jesus, he's in a glorified body at that state. And his appearance is transformed to a certain degree, and there is a glory about him. Now, if humanity is to take on that glorified state, there might be some merit to the idea that we'd be glowing beings. I don't know.
It's a fair depiction.
Exactly.
I mean, certainly if you look at the history of Christian art,
Right.
in painting and you know, yeah, Brandon.
Well, and the thing is it was an artistic way to show maybe a spiritual reality. You know what I mean? And even if physically the people didn't glow, I think the idea was just to show that it was something lost when man fell, which is true.
They were people that were walking with God. I mean, that's really the story of Adam and Eve pre the fall, you know, and what God is trying to get us back to all along.
And for a movie that is sort of making the case that man is wicked and man is always still wicked and he was wicked, to make this visual point that no, once man was not like he is,
Exactly.
is a very pointed point to make, because it's like, yes, we're making the point that man is like this, and it's,
Right.
but once man was perfect,
Right.
man was great, and he was in the garden. And when the effect, when you see Methuselah blessing her and there's like the glowy thing, like as I thought about it, I realized it's he's drawing a visual connection
Right.
to the glory that perfected man had.
Also, this is what was kind of tripping me up for a little while, was the serpent skin that they had, and Moses wraps it around. I'm sorry, Moses. I always say Moses.
That's
Noah.
in December,
I know. Noah wraps the serpent skin around his arm, and it has that glowy effect, and he blesses Shem and Elah and their children, and it was curious to me because it's like this is the serpent, but what I realized is that what they kept showing was the serpent pre-fall, and then it molts its skin, and then it becomes evil. I mean, you see it physically changes. It's the last remnant of Edenic reality.
Also, Adam in the creation account, the snake sheds its skin and Eve goes to the tree, and Adam bends down and he picks up the serpent skin.
Right.
He's holding it.
Right.
So it's like he had it, and
Yeah.
it's like part of him right before.
Well,
There's this exactly what you said, something you can touch.
Yeah.
And for the characters in the film, it's a way for them.
it's a reminder
to connect.
I think it's a reminder of the way things should have been before things fell.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's sort of an heirloom of Adam.
Yes.
It's what they have. It's like
right.
the reason it's in the ceremony and they use it is this has been passed to me from 10 generations from my first father.
Right. Yeah. There's that whole lineage aspect, but I do believe what it is indicating is this remnant, this sort of last relic of what God intended things, of how God intended things to be.
It's a relic of Eden.
It's a relic of Eden, exactly. And so I think it's
right.
important.
And to go to your point, Jake, is that it was, a reminder of what it was, but what I felt like was missing was that the movie kept looking back. Now, I wish there would have been some looking forward, like, I was almost left at the end of the movie like, God was gracious and merciful to save these individuals, but what next? Like, are they going to just keep looking back and that's it? That's all there is? And coming from the perspective that the director was coming from as a non-Christian and a non-believer.
Yes, he's a non-Christian. He is Jewish.
Fair enough. Yeah, he's Jewish, but he's
not atheistic or non-religious.
Right. He's not evangelical. Let's just put it that way.
Exactly.
So coming at it from that perspective, I could see why he wouldn't take that leap. Because like with the story, that going back to what Daniel was saying earlier, I was waiting for him in the movie because I was so sucked into it and I was so on board. And I was waiting for him to go into not only this is the reason that the Creator has every right to destroy us, but then maybe even he promised a Redeemer. Because that's like right after the fall.
See, I would have been unhappy if he'd done it. Now, I'll qualify that. If he had come up with a way of doing it that was totally dramatically satisfying and was absolutely amazing, of course I would love that. I have no problem with it, like in base concept, but I have a hard time imagining a movie that is genuinely about the story of Noah that pays that off, because that particular story in the Bible actually doesn't. Like, you could try to tie it into Genesis 3 and sort of circularly reference that point here, but I think it's kind of like saying, you know, while as a theological issue might be true, if you know Noah's hope is in a future redeemer, well, what's he worried about a flood for? You know what I mean? Like it starts to disrupt the logic of the storytelling, and it would be a very difficult obstacle to overcome.
Right. And coming from a Jewish perspective, I mean, Aronofsky isn't looking at Christ as the Messiah. You know, that's not a part of his hermeneutic as he's approaching the story of Noah. And so it makes sense within the Jewish framework, and he intended this to be a midrash on the story of Noah. It makes sense within that framework that he would present it this way. And what I love is that he doesn't put the redemption of humanity in humanity's hands. And I think he illustrates that by continuing the story of Noah after the flood and showing his shame and nakedness after he gets drunk. That's in Scripture. And it's very much an allusion, I believe, to the fall of Adam, where he eats of the fruit and he's naked and ashamed. And I think that's very much what's going on in the story of at the end of the movie with Noah. And I think what it's showing is that God is still going to be in control of these people's redemption, that they are still fallen. And so I don't think it takes a humanistic approach to redemption. And I do appreciate that it still puts it in the Creator's hands, in essence. So I think it does show that God is ultimately sovereign. It doesn't point to a Messiah necessarily, but it does show that God is still sovereign over humanity's redemption.
Yeah, I never connected that end scene like you did. I was thrown off by the time frame that it was in, and so probably why I didn't connect it. But you're right, I never thought about that. The fact that he was eating his fruit and, you know, parallel to the garden, and then was naked and ashamed. And now that I'm thinking about it, that is probably why Scripture parallels it how it does anyway.
Yeah, and it's showing that God is still, even after the cleansing, there's still more that needs to be done in humanity. And so I think that Aronofsky is pointing to that as well by relaying, not just ending it when they get off the ark and saying all was well. He's saying, no, this is an incredibly important part of the story that we need to deal with. And he does.
No, I completely agree with that, because it's easy to take the story of Noah, if you cut it off, as saying, God killed all the evil people, and now the good people shall inherit the earth. Especially if you disconnect it from the Bible and just tell the story.
Right.
You know, you make a little storybook and a movie. And he's like, no, this is the story of Noah.
Right.
That's part of it. And it makes that point. This is not God killing all the evil so that the good people can now live on the earth. You know, he did this. He showed mercy on a few who were not inherently better than the others. He simply chose to show mercy. I mean, that has all sorts of theological implications for the rest of Scripture.
Right.
And I think I did like that they actually moved the rainbow from where it actually occurs in the Scripture, which is right after they land, to the end of this story. You know, that Noah goes through this period. And obviously we don't know if he got his life together and reconciled with his wife at the end of the scriptural account. We hope so. I mean, I hope so. You know what I mean? Like, I hope that they ended with some sort of good relationship with his family. But by showing it at the end.
He blessed Shem and Japheth, and then he cursed Ham. Yeah.
But showing it at the end, because the rainbow is the statement of God's promise in the story of Noah. It's the promise that I'm not going to destroy the earth again with a flood. And even if you want to not be so specific as it wasn't in the movie, it's God's promise of like benevolence. It's his promise of provision. It's his promise of love, and that is the last visual symbol.
His promise of mercy for humankind. And that ultimately for us as Christians culminates in the Messiah, in Jesus Christ. And so I think that there is pointers to the fact that, you can adopt this into a Christian framework in many ways, and be satisfied. And I think, even though Aronofsky's not coming from that perspective, as a Jew, he's still looking for a Messiah. So that is still a resilient and important artifact of his faith,
Yeah, I think it would be safe to say that the film points to the future Messiah about as much as the specific account in the Bible does.
For sure.
It doesn't add to it. It doesn't do more. It doesn't use it as a means to point to that, as maybe you could do in another kind of film. But it doesn't take it out.
What it does show is that Noah is not the Messiah.
Yeah.
And I think, and that might have been the intent of the biblical author as well.
I think that was a really important part of the film for me, was that Noah was humanized to a point where you felt like he was the same as everybody else. You know what I mean? Like, he was the same as those people that were dying outside the ark. Like, there was nothing special about him that made him somehow have a right to be saved. And I feel like a lot of times when we look at these stories, especially like the kids' stories, which bother me to no end, of the happiness that's happening, and like, yeah, let's get all the animals on the ark, and everybody's safe. Well, yeah, but millions of people were dying also at the same time. And think about the inner turmoil of every single person on that boat. And I think that they actually did a good job of not only capturing Noah's turmoil, but also like everybody's issues. Like, they all were struggling with issues, like to some degree or another. The girl was pregnant, she was struggling with that, and the issue with Noah, and the wife with Noah, and like most of the conflicts involved him because he was the patriarch. But they all had these issues of pain that they were dealing with while they were inside the ark. It wasn't like an escape for them, really, even though it was.
And all of them were the results of sin in the world.
See, that's what I want to camp on for a minute, is that it showed that even Noah, even his family, the people whom God chose to save, and the Bible does say that Noah was righteous above most men in the time, or all men actually. It speaks in very stark terms about his righteousness and that he was a good man. But we know from the account of Scripture itself that he was not immune to sin. That the fall of Adam, the fallen heart of Adam, was still within him. What this movie really showed, and it showed in such just real and raw ways, even in the people within the family on the ark, is that sin of Cain was being perpetuated, that man was against man, and that was an incredible indicator of the fall of humanity, that humanity was never intended to be in disunity with one another. And that was rampant throughout this film, was the disunity on the horizontal level. I think where a lot of Christians get hung up is the fact that it doesn't show enough of the disunity between God and man. And that's true. I think he does talk about that quite a bit.
That's why I guess I think I see you're right in the sense that is the problem they have. I just don't know that it's an accurate problem to have with the movie.
No, I don't think so. That's what I'm saying. I don't think that's an accurate criticism. I think what this film is really focusing on is the horizontal dimensions of the fall, between it's man versus man and man versus creation, and that was never the way God intended it. God intended humanity to be in unity and in harmony and to walk with Him, and in so doing, they would walk with one another in harmony and unity as well. And I think what this movie shows is the dissolution of all of that. And it does it very, very vividly and in very raw. And Jennifer Connelly's performance in that scene where she says, if you do this, you will lose everyone you love. I mean, and that performance was just really moving, but it just showed how deep the heart of Cain was in so many, in these characters, and how deeply it ran.
Sorry. I did like how Cain was a touchstone for the movie,
right?
In a lot of ways,
it was a triptych in many ways. It came back like 3 different times, I think. Yeah,
and because they talked about the fall in the garden, but then and the fruit of that was this brother against brother. The first 2 brothers, and one kills the other. And lets you kind of process the weight of what that is, and they kept showing the visual,
Right.
of the rock.
Yeah.
It was just like it was jarring. You watch it and you flinch and you see it, and it's like the way it was shot was beautiful. But
Right.
And the descendants of Cain, and Tubal Cain was actually one of my favorite characters in the movie.
Yeah.
Because, first he's like your typical skeptic, cynic. No one ever in the entire movie sort of disputes the existence of God.
No.
But they all have very different attitudes
It's one of the
about
beautiful,
God.
Yeah, it's one of the beautiful aspects about it.
Yeah, it is, because you don't see that. Usually conflict about God is always the skeptic versus the believer, in any film, regardless of who makes it. But this was like, no, we all believe in the Creator. We all believe we come from Eden.
Right.
We know that. We're descended from Cain, Seth,
Right.
whoever. But today, this is relevant to us in very different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And when he realizes there are miracles, this is true, something's going on, he immediately is like, okay, yeah, I accept this, and I'm going to survive, and I'm going to do whatever it takes. And not until later does he address God directly. In that moment, he does not immediately drop to his knees and be like, oh God, I'm I humble myself, I'm sorry, whatever, I see now. No, he's like, we're going to take it by force, we're going to live. When he realizes the rain's coming, there's a beautiful scene when Ray Winstone's in the tent and it's raining. And it's like, in this movie, rain is like death. It's like acid rain. It's like the rain's coming and this is your death coming, And he's like praying, but in that very confrontational, angry way. And he's like, am I not made in your image?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, because humanity has lost that. We've lost that thought of we're made in God's image. We don't consider it. Even Christians don't discuss it enough. But certainly, non-religious people, non-Jews, non-Christians, it's not even in their vocabulary, this idea.
Right.
And it's such an important part of our human heritage. And to see all the players in this film embracing it, but one of them getting it so wrong. When he's explaining to Ham, like, yeah, go out and subdue the earth. Like, he's quoting, but he's got it wrong. He's just got it completely wrong.
Right.
Go ahead.
And that's one of the things that I've been thinking about, because I had, and this is going to go into maybe our next section of what people have said about the film, but I had someone say to me, well, he was more like a Christian than Noah was because he was taking dominion and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, but no, he was quoting scriptures, but so do the demons. Like, seriously, he was completely against God. The only reason that he said those things or did those things or even prayed to God was completely for himself. There was zero reason he did it for any kind of glorification of God or any kind of well-being for another person. It was 100% for himself so that he would be preserved. And, like, if you can't get that after you see the movie, you need to watch it again because it's obviously clear. And like you said, Daniel, he doesn't even pray to God until he realizes he can't do it himself. Until he realizes that's the only option he has. Then he finally prays to God. Instead of earlier when he realizes this is true, just immediately, boom, praying to God. But he doesn't do that.
Because he knows it's true. I feel like the traditional evangelical approach to the story is, those unbelieving people, like that, they knew, like they were told and they didn't believe. Like they didn't believe that rain was going to come and God was going to destroy. And this movie doesn't even allow to toy with that because you have the miracles. You have the forest and the everything to sort of prove, no, God's at work here. And also to prove to the audience, by the way, because if it's just dreams and Noah has a dream and he builds an ark, but God never speaks, you could reasonably take away from the movie, well, it's unclear, maybe there's no God. It's perspective. But no, like the movie dispenses with that.
Right.
Because there are these miracles.
Right.
And creatures, and it's like, the creatures, the beings are like, God, we cursed us, like there's no room to say, you can watch this movie and you don't have, like, you can kind of watch it and God's not involved.
Yeah.
Even though he doesn't speak verbally. And so it's like, the characters have no excuse. They're all living in a world where we have to acknowledge the reality. Now, how do we deal with it? How do we respond to it?
And also to the point of Tubal Cain's character, he was talking to Ham in the boat. And I love how he was like saying, we need to kill these animals and we need to eat them, and how people are like up in arms like, well, Noah was a vegetarian. Do they not realize that animals were not given to people to eat until after the flood? Like, did nobody read their Bible? That's my question.
Well, I mean, I look. I'm not going to point fingers. I forget. I've been reminded of that in the discussion.
Well, there's some debate about it. I mean, obviously, in the Sailhammer, John Sailhammer he wrote the meaning of the Pentateuch and stuff like that. He says that the reason why Noah was commanded to take the clean animals on board was so that they could eat them. They were for eating. Because in the account, he takes so many clean animals and so many unclean animals. The clean animals were for consumption, basically, is what he argues. Now, that might be true. I don't know of the direct command to eat animals after after the flood.
Genesis 9. Let me switch over to the ESV because that's what I said I would do. Genesis 9, starting in verse 1. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. But as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man."
Okay.
So it's not conclusive.
Right.
But this passage is used to support this idea when he says, "I give you every living thing that lives shall be food for you," that this is a change.
Okay.
That he's saying this because it was not the case before.
In Genesis 3:17, it says, skipping down a little bit, "Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field." So it's very clear. And then it says, "By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread." So it's pretty clear. And he also says that he's given the fruits of the trees earlier in the passage. It's pretty clear that most of all the directives toward what mankind is supposed to eat is fruits, trees, not animals.
Well, let's put it to you this way. Let's put it this way.
Yeah.
Making a film that says that Noah didn't eat meat and that it was wrong to eat meat is not unsupportable by this scripture.
Absolutely.
Not that it's not debatable, not that this could, we're certainly filling blanks no matter how you play with it, but it is not something that some filmmaker just made up.
Well, for sure, Adam and Eve did not eat meat.
Right.
I mean, and that was that was how God designed the world. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that we shouldn't, and God himself says that it's given to us to eat. But I'm saying that in the Edenic sort of model of creation, humanity didn't eat animals. So
what's interesting is this passage, and this is repeated elsewhere in Scripture, in the Old Testament laws and so forth, specifically prohibits them from eating blood.
Right.
And in this film, we see Tubal-Cain just eat this animal, live, basically, or maybe he kills it and eats it, but it's like eating the blood.
Well, it's kind of.
And elsewhere, the people ripping the animals apart, eating them totally raw. It's like, this is not a barbecue. This is not a cut of steak. These people are behaving like animals. If we were to see people like this, we would think they were sick and something was wrong with them. No matter how much meat you eat, and how raw your steak is, we're talking about something else, And I was thinking it's interesting, the animal at the beginning that's killed, that, people make a big deal of that first scene. It's interesting to me that that's not an animal that we have. And so it's almost like he may be making the subtle point that we just witnessed the extinction of that animal.
Yeah.
I
kept thinking about that every time an animal was killed on the ark too. If they only had two of them, I'm like, well, that's the extinction of that.
He goes, "Wait, what are you doing? Because it's the only animal."
Yeah.
And he says to Tubal-Cain, he's like, "There's only two of any animal on the thing." He goes, "Oh, there's only one of me." Let's segue and let's talk about, because one of the big accusations of the film is that it's environmentalist, kind of an environmentalist treatise, or it's being the story of Noah is being repurposed to support an environmentalist agenda. So let's address that since we're kind of talking about it already. Go ahead.
I have thoughts about that. I mean, I did not walk away from this film with the overwhelming sense that this was environmentalist propaganda. I thought of it much more. It was much more focused upon man obeying and walking with the Creator. That was the central thrust of the film, I believe. Now, one of the indicators that man was not walking with their Creator was the dissolution of human relationships and the dissolution of humanity's responsibility to care for creation, which was commanded in the garden. It was the walking away from Eden. That was the evidence of man's fall. Now, that's real. I mean, humanity was given the mandate to care for creation and to live in unity with one another. But So I think that Aronofsky, whether he has political sort of, a political soapbox behind this movie or not, I don't believe it was an unbiblical emphasis.
I mean,
it didn't feel preachy.
It was a fair depiction of what a world that we sort of get from Genesis could look like.
Yeah.
A world where all men pursued their own desires and interests at the expense of everything else. And after, a long time of this, this is what it looks like.
Right.
Just to the point that Jake was making, I think the thing that people try to read into this movie is the environmental message, because a lot of man's sin is portrayed as against creation for their own desires. But the thing is the first thing Adam is tasked with is tending the garden. So it makes sense to make a connection to that mandate, that one act that he was asked to obey, aside from not eating the fruit of the tree, that would be the thing that the people rebelled against first. Like, that would make sense, And then, as you mentioned, Jake, the idea that people were violent toward each other, not walking in harmony, the sin of Cain, he kept going back to that. I don't know how it's not more clear. Now, you could, make the point of, there's a few things where, like, the animal's killed. But then I go back to saying, well, Noah took that animal and he burnt it as a sacrifice to God. Like, he wasn't worshiping the animal. He was burning it as a burnt offering to God. Like, that was such a, 5 minutes of the movie, boom, you have a burnt offering to the Creator. I was, blown away. Just because I knew who the director was and I didn't really expect it to be very Christian, if you will, I went into it and I was like, this is a lot more Christian than I expected. I'm on board.
The sacrifice, which is interesting, is animal sacrifices all over Genesis, long before the extensive sacrificial laws were presented in Exodus. Yeah. While we don't know the details of sort of the Genesis sacrificial tradition, there is a sacrificial tradition, and it's not regular. We don't know what it is. So to say that, say that, if Noah's, in this story he's not to eat meat. This animal is killed. An appropriate thing to do would be to present it as an offering. And the way it's visually depicted is very respectful. It's covered. It's it's on a little altar. Mm-hmm. And I believe you said the camera kind of follows the smoke up to heaven.
Yeah.
And
which is right after they get off the ark. That's what Moses did. What
Noah did.
Does.
Right.
And it says that it was a pleasing aroma to the Lord.
Which is another reason they speculate about the 7 clean, is so that he could make sacrifices.
Right.
Because if obviously you can't sacrifice an animal, there's only 2 of it. Well, we're not making sacrifice. Yeah. So, there's a lot of interesting stuff. But it was... I could understand. I feel like if you come at it with a political expectation, and you're looking for that, you can see that. But you could probably find that in a sermon. If someone were to preach a good sermon on Genesis, you could maybe read that into it. But you're just not looking for it. You don't go into church and you're expecting that. You have a different mindset.
Right.
You brought up the sin of Cain, which I love. They come back to that constantly. It's grating. So it's like, you're right. It's not, oh man, it's not the day the earth stood still.
Right.
The 2008 the day the earth stood still, which was clearly,
right.
You cannot be trusted with this planet.
Right. Or The Happening. From
Shyamalan, it's not. Yeah. We have films that are like that. We can look at them and compare them.
And some people would argue that because of Noah's reaction and this is what I've heard from some other folks who've had criticism, because of Noah's reaction on the ark to say, well, we need to kill everybody so we don't spoil God's creation, that it's somehow worshiping the creation, which I would argue no, because devoid of man's fall, creation is good. Because the trees glorify God every single moment of the day, whereas mankind does not. So really the logical conclusion he comes to is accurate. If man is not there, then creation glorifies God 100% of the time.
We talked about justice earlier, and it's just. Man is the one that sinned. And if you're watching this movie, you're accepting this idea of we're all sinful and it's hereditary, and the Bible talks about that, you're born sinful.
Yeah.
You can't.
That was a really interesting thing that sin was assumed in humanity. It was like it was a disease they had been born with. It wasn't something that when you're 30 you finally
we'll kill all the adults,
right,
and then we'll teach the children,
right,
and the children, when they are taught correctly,
right,
will be good,
right.
because that's how people think.
Right.
A lot of people, regardless of their philosophy.
Yeah, it had an incredibly biblical doctrine of sin. I mean, to be perfectly honest, and I think it was a really important aspect of the film for me, because I think it made the stakes of the film the same as Scripture.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There was no. Absolutely. No, I think that's a good point. That because he let the animals rule the earth, or however you want to look at it, but it really wasn't what he was saying. What he was saying was, we are the problem. We are broken. Mm-hmm. I understand. God has taught me that we are all sinful. Mm-hmm. I've seen it. There's a great scene where he stands on top and he looks at the village, the city, and it's just horrible.
And then he sees it in himself.
Yeah, he knows.
Yeah.
He knows. Like, he looks and he realizes he's not standing there going, "Oh, look at these humans."
Right.
He's saying, "This is us.
Right.
This is us. Right. This is what we are."
And that obviously leads up to the entire whole dilemma on the ark with him wanting to kill Elah's twins, her daughters. It's an incredible story of the infection of sin in humanity, and the fact that the Creator is the only one who can undo it, I think. And that's perfectly consistent with the Christian faith, even though it doesn't go into the realm of Christ as the Messiah necessarily. I think that it can absolutely lead us in dialogue in that direction. And we talked about using this movie evangelistically earlier. While I don't think it needs to be, that doesn't need to be our approach to everything, just to use it evangelistically. I do think we can appreciate it on its own as a film. But I think if we were to use it evangelistically, it gives us incredible dialogue material with people. It really exposes the deeply implanted nature of sin, that it's not just actions, that it is a fundamental disposition of our hearts. And I think that that's something this film really captures.
And I think that, because I'm not as on top of using this evangelistically as Jake is, but for ourselves as believers, to give us the proper attitude about our own sin, and an understanding of what we are, what we were, and the whole story through that lens, that will help us in talking with others, even if we don't, necessarily reference the film, but
right.
But it's that reorientation of the attitude, that forces you to confront that.
Yeah, because honestly, I've never seen a movie or like a visual medium portray and hit sin as hard as this movie did. And that is something to be said. Like, I was just thinking about it, and you're right. I think it can be used not only for unbelievers or those who aren't religious, but also for believers, evangelicals and Christians, because we need a wake-up call. To be honest with you, we do, because a lot of Christians just consider themselves good just because they are, not because of anything that has to do with God or the fact that, we were like Noah, we were like all these other people who died. Like, the world could be purged again. You know what I mean? If it were not for God's mercy, it would be. Because that's who we are. We do it on a different level, a different subtlety, if you will, now. But we do the same thing every single day that they did.
We seek after ourselves. We seek after our desires before anything else.
Yeah.
That's what we do. All people do. And that is, that's the common sin, regardless of what it looks like. It may not look like what we see in the movie or, any movie, but that's a common denominator. Mm-hmm. All right. So I want to hit one point and then move into something else. I just want to say I loved the little bit with Niall, because I love to think that Ham went and named a river after her and was just like that this woman has sort of haunted, an entire region for thousands of years. I just love that. But I want to talk about, so there's a particular critique of the film that I want to address here, that the film is blasphemous. And it's usually centered on one of two specific points, one of which is more general, and I think maybe perhaps more worth discussion, and the other one is very pointed and I just think completely inaccurate. But the first is, the second one is hopefully shorter. We'll start there. So the biggest one, that I don't remember his name, but a guy posted an article today, in fact, basically saying that this film glorifies Satan and it makes Satan out to be a good guy.
Yeah, it seems like a stretch to say that this movie glorifies Satan, because Satan doesn't even figure very strongly in the movie at all. The character of Satan,
right.
Other than the serpent. And if it's the serpent's skin, then I think he's misinterpreting what that represents. if it's the Nephilim, then that's something else we'll get into.
Well, at first,
Just cinematically, not theologically.
okay, cinematically, I actually really like the Nephilim.
Okay.
I thought that the idea of them being these spiritual beings encased in stone and kind of trapped on Earth, if you will, was cool. I mean, and I thought they looked cool. A lot of people have critiqued it to say, "Oh, it looks like something out of Lord of the Rings," you know. But I thought that the whole like feel of this movie was a cross between Lord of the Rings, Waterworld, and post-apocalyptic type of architecture. You know what I mean? Like, seriously, that was the feel. Like, because I feel like they did a really good job, even going back to a point earlier that you guys were mentioning, that they did a good job showing how technology had advanced, how, like, man had advanced. Like, their cities were big, and they had technology, like you see at the mines and things like that. They weren't just, like, this total primitive people. That's what I really liked about it, because thousands of years possibly had passed between Adam and the flood. So, you know, and we know the amount of time that each person lived, and they even overlapped each other. So there was at least 1,000, if not more, years that had passed. So there was a ton of time for them to gain technology and learn things and build cities and all this. And obviously destroy things too while they're at it. So I liked that, and I thought that the feel of the Nephilim worked right into the feel of the movie cinematically and artistically. And I thought that their being trapped on Earth and kind of in bondage was good as well. And I didn't have a problem with them for even the reason they were there, because it's not really clear in Scripture. It doesn't even necessarily make the connection where they are equated with the angels that fell with Satan. Like, they're kind of separate, you know what I mean, if you look at the Scripture narrative.
Yeah, it depends on how you interpret that beginning of chapter 6 in Genesis, where it says the sons of God intermarried or whatever with the daughters of man. And some people think they interpret those as angels. Others just think they're from the line of Seth. They're the clean line, basically, of Seth. The daughters of man are the line of Cain. And so you see, the chosen line intermingling with the cursed line, basically. And so, yeah, I obviously Aronofsky went in the direction of these are angels of some sort, fallen angels in a manner of speaking. But their great sin, was attempting to aid mankind. That's why they're in bondage on earth, trapped, encased, like you said, in rock, and these spiritual beings sort of unable to move freely like they did. They're very obviously very agile and whatnot when they're in their spiritual form, and then when they're in their rock form, they're very awkward almost. I don't know what the word is. They're clunky. They're
clumsy.
Yeah, they're clumsy.
And
exactly.
What's interesting is, I was telling him this at dinner, the way they look, their biology, their anatomy, is very similar to what we read in Revelation when it describes the cherubim in heaven, multi-armed, limbed, faces at odd angles, very, very odd imagery. And more interesting, the being in the movie says that after the fall of man, which I think separates these from the traditional, and this could be completely inaccurate. I mean, but in the frame of the narrative, separates them from the traditional demon, which of course is generally accepted to have occurred somehow before, because Satan is in the garden, and obviously he's already rebelled. He took the angels with him, so somehow, in the grand scheme of things, before that moment, this legion of demons that we kind of accept rebelled already. So these are not them.
Right.
These are not them, because it was after Adam fell,
right,
out of, they say, pity. They wanted to go down and help. God said no.
Yeah.
And
you said it almost has that feel of like Prometheus. The myth of Prometheus.
Yeah, compared to Prometheus, because Prometheus wanted to give man fire. He did, and Zeus cast him out of Olympus. And the reason I'm not offended by maybe referencing a Greek myth as you're writing a script about a Bible movie is because I think it's not unfair to say that ancient myths may have some sort of basis in fact. Many of them are similar. This idea of knowledge that man's not ready for, and a divine being is giving it, and there being a cost, is not unique to the Greek mythology. Mm-hmm. So as you're filling out a story, it's not necessarily a bad touchstone to go to. And throughout their entire sort of narrative, they're presented as, we rebelled against God, and boy was that a mistake. We're cursed. We're in rock. we helped man, but look what they did with it. They used it for evil.
There's an incredible regret about these guys, and they will not support anyone who is not walking with the Creator.
Right.
That's why they choose Noah. That's why they choose to help Noah.
They're like, we're not helping anybody.
Right.
You stay away. Like, we don't want you people. We don't want anything to do with you.
Right.
And then he's like, no, I'm on a mission from God, basically.
And the redemption of those angels, I mentioned this to Daniel earlier. I mean, when, spoilers, when the rock creatures die, the angels get sucked back up into heaven, I guess. The first thing he says before he dies is, Creator, forgive me. And that's when he is accepted back to God. So there's this sense of, he acknowledges that God is just and he's receiving his mercy. Again, that dialectic of justice and mercy sort of playing out once again. There's some criticisms about them being used as a Deus ex machina in the plot of the movie to help.
What a great accusation in a religious film.
In a religious film, right? Yeah, I mean, God is the Deus ex machina in this film, So I think that's just sort of hogwash. I think obviously they're not in Scripture. We don't. It's very vague what the sons of God are, what the Nephilim are in general.
Whether those are even the same.
Right. Whether they're even the same thing. That's another sort of debate. This is obviously artistic license. Aronofsky went in this direction. And, I don't think it undermined the film in any way.
And specifically, I don't think he was glorifying demons.
Absolutely not.
Certainly not intentionally. Interpretively, unintentionally, but I don't think that was what he set out to do. We're going to take the demons of the Bible and Lucifer and cast them in this heroic role. That is not what happened.
No, and I think you pointed that out too when you said, like, obviously these are some other form of fallen angel other than the demons, because chronologically that would have taken place at a different point.
And don't you think that he actually used those characters to actually show a parallel to man's need for forgiveness? That's what I thought he did a really good job of, because when
absolutely, yeah.
Like when you said, Jake, earlier, when he says, Creator, forgive me, and then he goes up into heaven, I felt like it was redemption. It was a picture of redemption for that angel that was fallen, and a picture of redemption for man as well. And so that connection, I felt like, was made, and I liked that character was used to bring that about.
The common sin between humanity and between those spiritual beings is that they oppose the will of the Creator. That is what Aronofsky's point is that if you oppose the will of the Creator, it is sin. And so, I mean, that's an incredibly biblical understanding of sin, and not at all a glorification of any fallen being. It's a glorification of the will of God himself. Aside from, whether they were silly or, maybe a little, they didn't fit into the narrative as well. I don't know. I'm not super critical of them, but I don't think that they undermined that central point at all.
So anyway, reading this article, a lot of what he talks about is what we just discussed.
Okay.
The Nephilim, and he casts them as demons. He talks about Gnosticism. He accuses the depiction of the glowy Adam and Eve as saying they had no physical form, and he's making connections to Kabbalah. I just feel like articles like this, to me, it feels like it's like the mixture of conspiracy theorism. Like, yeah, you could go there. You could take those arguments and apply them to the film, but it's not necessarily fair to say, well, that was the intent, or that's even a reasonable way to view the film.
I don't think that there was an undercurrent of materiality is bad in this film. I mean, there was no hint of Gnosticism. I think, like Brandon said earlier, the glowy figures of Adam and Eve were to indicate a spiritual reality, that is very real, to visually depict that. I think, if you look at what Elah said about the animals, why is God, when young Elah, when Noah asks his family, why would God choose to save the animals? And young Elah says, because they're innocent, because they live as they did in Eden. I think that there's an indication there that materiality, the material world is good, and God called it good. And so I don't think that that's a fair criticism.
Here's his last note. He goes, because he said, some readers may think I'm being hard on people for not noticing the Gnosticism at the heart of this film. I'm not expecting rank-and-file viewers to notice these things. I would expect exactly what we've seen, head-scratching confusion. I've got a whole different standard for Christian leaders, college and seminary professors, pastors, and PhDs. If a serpent's skin wrapped around the arm of a godly Bible character doesn't set off any alarms, I don't know what to say. And this is Dr. Brian Mattson.
I think that's a complete misinterpretation of the serpent skin, because like I said before, there's a fundamental change in that serpent from before it molts its skin to when it does molt its skin. It becomes hideous when it molts its skin, right? There's an unfallen serpent, and then there's a fallen serpent, right? And I think that what that remnant is, that snake skin, is actually like we said, a relic from pre-fall Eden, and I think a reminder of the way things were.
I agree, and I feel like Satan is not in this movie except as the agent of the fall of man.
Yeah,
like the serpent is there; it's clearly connected to the fall, but beyond that, he's simply not a presence in this movie.
I mean, he's personified in some sense through Tubal-Cain, and there's even that great sort of like motif of him being like the serpent when he's in the ark in the serpent area.
Yeah.
So I think that there's very much this sort of understanding the personification of Satan in this character in opposition to the will of the Creator. And that's what Satan means. It means, adversary. And so I think that that's exactly, Satan doesn't figure heavily, but Tubal-Cain sort of fills that place.
Yeah. I want to be cautious because I reacted similarly. Like initially, I had to think about the serpent skin.
Yeah.
Because I understood the imagery. Another way I thought it could be taken is this is like the pelt of the serpent. The serpent would be their ancient enemy. And so like to have his skin, it's almost like a trophy, like a badge. We don't know what happened to the actual snake, right?
I think the power that it has, because it does that like sort of spirity illuminy thing, right? When it's wrapped around Noah's arm, I think that it's that same glow that Adam and Eve had. It's the same glow that Methuselah sort of had when he healed Elah. I think there's this indication that this is a pre-fall Edenic power, that the Creator has sort of infused in this object. And it's not in Scripture, and
but it seems like a remnant of Eden, where obviously things were very different,
right?
Where humans were different,
right?
And Methuselah seems to be especially connected to that tradition,
right?
And maybe just because he's 2 generations
before
even
Noah,
the
seed of Eden,
right? He has the seed, which was I loved it. I loved the whole idea of this is a seed from Eden, because to me, Eden is a physical place,
right?
Well, why wouldn't there be a seed of Eden? You know what I mean? Like,
and that this thing that would save humanity would be constructed from the very trees of the garden,
But I loved Methuselah as a character. I loved the flaming sword, even it's a throwaway. But I was like totally confused by it, and then I thought, wait a minute, where have I heard flaming sword? Genesis.
Right.
There's a flaming sword and a cherubim guarding the Garden of Eden, and maybe one of the in the movie, maybe the cherubim is one of the guys who's like, hey, I'm going to help him. Here's a sword.
Yeah.
Brandon.
Yeah. To go back to what you were talking about earlier in regards to Satan, basically, I think the reason that Satan is not really portrayed much in the film is because it's more of an focus on the gulf between God and man. Like, I think that was more the issue. Because even though the serpent did tempt Eve in the garden, it was still man that chose to sin. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, they could have chose not to sin, but they chose to sin. So it wasn't Satan's fault that they sinned. Really, Satan doesn't play any part in the fall other than the actual temptation. And man chose to sin. Maybe they would have chosen to sin without Satan there. I don't know.
Well, and again, the specific account in Genesis of the flood does not reference Satan,
right,
in any way. So it's not, and I wasn't bringing this up as a way to say, well, why isn't Satan in the movie? It was more like people are saying it's sort of glorifying Satan and making the case against it. But I don't think that Satan's in the story. He's not in every Bible story. It's not necessary to sort of put him into every Bible story. It probably overemphasizes his role, frankly, in human history. If the Bible and the writers of the Bible choose not to, then why should we?
I completely agree with that. I think Satan is way overemphasized, even in our daily conversations about happenings in the world. Unfortunately, it's like Satan's blamed for everything. It's like, no, that was people.
And I think that was Aronofsky's point at some level, is that, yes, maybe Satan was the instigator to some degree, but it's humanity that's perpetuated it. And that's their great sin, is that they've opposed the will of the Creator. And so I think to put Satan in there would almost give an escape for humanity's for the justice of God against humanity. The real justice would be executed against Satan if he had figured more prominently in the film. It's humanity that's the problem in this film.
I think the environmentalism and the Nephilim are the two big objections. I mean, we've talked about, obviously people object to this idea of, they've called Noah a homicidal maniac. And why it's like he gets closer to devotion to God when he, wants to kill. It's just like, no, you don't understand. Like the movie is not asking you to think he's right. Like, I feel like so in this movie, God speaks to this man through visions and dreams and promptings. And clearly says, okay, I'm killing everybody, build a boat, the whole thing. And he, and as we do, I think as Christians, seeing what was clearly told him by God and then looking at the world, comes to a logical conclusion. God is bringing about the end of the human race. I've been chosen to save the animals with my family. We have, this girl's barren. Presumably his wife is too old to bear children. He's like, this makes sense to me. This makes sense. I understand. We're going to get through. And what he tells them, we're going to die. You're going to bury me. Last man, like, it makes sense. So he's like, that's what's going to happen. And when his view, his understanding of God's will is challenged by something he did not anticipate, expect, or understand, he sees that as an undermining of God. Those are his words. And that is a fundamental misunderstanding. And I think it's clear in the movie because this is a miraculous thing. Yes, Methuselah was the agent, through his blessing, but nobody in this movie really exercises power absent the creator.
Right.
So it would really be a leap to say, oh, Methuselah is a wizard. That's a stretch.
That this was some sort of power that resided within him,
right,
apart from the creator. Yeah, no.
Right. Everything you see, every miracle is tied to the creator indirectly or directly. Yeah. And so this is a miraculous thing. And that they're twins, spoilers, and they're two girls. It's like, it's all, my friend was with me. He's like, called it when it was two girls, he was like, but it's like, this is clearly the provision of God. Yeah.
And that's his wife. I'm blanking on her name. Yeah, Jennifer Connelly. She always says, God will give us what we need when we need it. The theme of God's provision is prevalent throughout this film, and Noah's blinded to it when it's in front of him because he is so convinced of what he thinks God's will is.
And let's cut him a little bit of slack.
Right.
He just witnessed the destruction of an entire people. He was a party to it in terms of not helping them. He went along, he obeyed. He didn't let these people on the ark, and he let that girl get trampled, which was horrible, which, I think it's good that that's ambiguous. It's like, well, we don't, you don't want to come down with, on the one hand, yeah, in his mind, she's already dead. Like at that point, I think in his mind, they're all already dead. And as a human being, like that's how you handle it. God's decided they're dead. We have to do our thing. I loved Ham's reaction. I thought it was human, natural, justified. Like their whole thing over that. But it's the progression, and he gets to that point where he has gone too far, and that's what the movie's saying. And the movie is not saying that God went too far, and that by disobeying God, he does the right thing.
No, I don't think so at all. I think that's even what we were talking about at dinner was the moral of the story, kind of. And it's so uncommon for movies to have morals these days, explicit ones at least. But when Elah sits with Noah and says, God chose you and gave that choice into your hands, and you chose mercy, and there's an aspect of the idea that God would have been justified either way.
Yes.
If God had chosen, if Noah had killed the two girls and humanity was extinguished, God was just. But through Noah, God was merciful, and that's completely consistent with his character either way.
Right. It's sad.
Right.
It's horrible to contemplate.
But even today, if God wiped all of us out right now, this moment, he would be justified. You know what I mean? Like, that's hard to say apart from,
It is. It's true. It's only through his mercy, and it is in his promised mercy. But it is promised, but it is his mercy.
I mean, the sovereignty of God in this movie is just hammered time and time again, and it's incredible that this movie gets his sovereignty so right in many ways, especially coming from a religious perspective that I don't share,
Well, especially since that's a very difficult thing to depict in general.
Exactly.
Even when you have a religious position that's tested and true and you can back it up, like to depict it that well is difficult, even for someone who's trying to.
Right.
And presumably he's not even trying.
And to go back to the provision of God, I feel like I'm always going back, but I'm going to go back. a lot of people, one of the common accusations is that God isn't present enough in the film because he doesn't speak directly to Noah and things like that. Whereas I would say that artistically, even the seed of Eden is shown as God's provision. The very trees that he was able to use was because God allowed.
God told him to go to Methuselah. That was the message. He's like, okay, he wants me to go. He showed me the mountain. So like all of that.
If people think God isn't present enough in the movie of Noah, they should read the book of Esther because he's not mentioned once.
That's a cliche. But
yeah, I'm just saying though. I mean, I think God's presence in this movie is shown much more through his actions and through the provision that he gives to Noah and his family, and obviously there is even explicit sort of understandings of his revelations, his special revelation to Noah in the visions and whatnot. So I think that's just it's a inaccurate criticism.
And like you were saying, Jake, seeing God's sovereignty, I think that was what was powerful for me, was seeing not just his voice being heard, but his actions and how all these things played out exactly how he wanted it to, ultimately. And I think that is hard to depict in a film. It's like to see all the pieces line up exactly how he wants. That's pretty amazing. Even like going back to Methuselah and the seed of Eden and the provision of the trees for the ark, and even going as far as the fallen angels to help Noah build the ark. Even though that's not scriptural and that's an addition and an artistic liberty he's made, in a sense, that is a way to show God's sovereignty even in the building of the boat itself.
And the protection of his people at the end, obviously, when they're being attacked by Tubal-Cain's army. So I think, that theme of God's sovereignty and his provision and his protection of those who walk with him is an incredibly, incredibly strong undercurrent in this film. Not even an undercurrent; it's explicitly there, And so I think that Christians would do well to recognize that in this film and value it for that fact, because that's the theme of Scripture in many ways.
As sort of the last topic, why are we seeing? Because I think we've covered the issues of the film pretty well at this point. But why are we seeing in the Christian community the sort of reaction which I would characterize, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, as very angry, resentful, offended, almost manic to this film? Why are we seeing that? Why is that happening?
Well, I think Christians think they own the story of Noah. And I think God ultimately owns the story of Noah, but
I agree. We all agree.
But I think it's also deeply woven into the fabric of many other religions, and not many other, but Judaism in particular, and that's where Aronofsky's coming from, and so he is presenting in many ways a very Jewish perspective of the story of Noah, and I think that Christians are upset with the fact that he takes poetic license, artistic license, that he's introducing historical details that aren't in the text, that they have this sort of high concept of inerrancy that they feel every movie needs to sort of adhere to, and I just don't know that I think that they're afraid in many ways of what this story might be telling people about God, and I think that because they're afraid of it, it's coloring their interpretations of the film.
Well, let me throw this hypothetical. It seems to me like the movie, and I want to get your reaction too, Brandon, but it seems like the movie is saying, God judges the wicked and has the right to destroy them, which seems like what conservative Christians are saying all the time.
Right.
So I find it odd if they're worried about the impression the movie's going to give people about God. Mm-hmm. Yet this is essentially what they pitch.
But that's not what people are focusing on in this story, especially the Christians that are angry. They're focusing on the environmental subplot of the story. They're focusing on these other things like the skin of the serpent and whatnot. They're not focusing on the major thread, the melodic line of the story, which is that God is sovereign and he will protect those who walk with him, And so I think interpreting the movie from the
show mercy to those who walk with him, I think.
What did I say?
Protect, which I get where you were going, but I feel like it's not a quid pro quo. It's not that walk with him and he'll protect you. It's he'll show mercy to those who walk with him out of his own goodness. Right?
Exactly. I think it's a fundamental misinterpretation of the film in many ways that's sparking such controversy over it, because I think it really does hit many of themes of Scripture, and many of the themes that, like you said, conservative evangelicals pitch all the time. And so, though it does it in a way that we might not feel comfortable with, I don't think that undermines it as a valuable contribution to Christian filmmaking.
The ongoing Christian discussion.
Yeah, the ongoing.
Brandon, what are your thoughts?
Well, I've heard a lot of the same thing from many different people, a lot of outrage from a lot of Christians that I know. And one of the biggest things that I hear is, don't touch our Bible, don't touch our Holy Scriptures. If a movie was made based on the Quran, the Islams would be all up in arms, things like that. And for me, I don't think that a movie based on the Bible has to necessarily have every detail perfectly in line if it doesn't work artistically for the film. That doesn't mean I think that it should deviate message-wise from the Bible, which I think that this film doesn't deviate message-wise. After we've discussed it even here, I think that it has a strong thread, as you mentioned, Jake, that the ones that walk with God will be protected and given mercy. The ones that do not will be judged. And in this movie, it's shown as a very swift and harsh judgment, which maybe Christians are uncomfortable with, but I thought it was appropriate for the story that was being told. And I also think that a lot of people don't go into the movie without all these presuppositions that it's going to have a certain thing in it. I had to be careful of that myself because I had read some early reviews of scripts and all these, I would say they're hateful type of blogs and articles and things like that basically try to paint this movie in a specific light of specific things that were said. And had I not tried to leave those consciously at the door, I may have read those into the film. And I'm not saying that the people that write those don't genuinely believe what they're writing, but I think that they're misinterpreting the film completely. So that's pretty much all I have to say about that topic.
Because I read those reviews, and I feel like many of them are very disrespectful, which maybe they feel justified, if they think they're protecting the Scriptures or whatever, but it's look, you have a man here who spent years of his life writing a story, a script about Noah, making this film, actors, people, and you're criticizing their film because you the reasons that they've stated. I think as believers, because many of these people are Christians, at least regardless of what you have to say, you should say it respectfully. You should disagree with him. If you want to say, you know what, I think your film is completely inaccurate, tramples all over the Bible. But I want to tell you that respectfully because as a Christian, if that's what I believe, I want you to see your error and I want you to sort of change your mind, right? I want you to make this correction. Instead, it's almost like they just as soon rip him down, tie him up, throw him in a jail cell, forget about it.
Yeah, I would say if you're upset with this film and you're a Christian, try to make a better one. I think the Christian filmmaking community.
That's funny because that's exactly what I said to somebody today. I said, you know what? If a Christian made a movie about Noah that was that well made and that powerful, I would recommend that movie. But I can't.
Yeah, I can't. We can't. We know that Christian filmmaking is it's getting better, I'll say, but it's still very much suffering, and so we have to leave it to other people to do it for us in many ways, and I think that Aronofsky did a very good job with this text, with this story. Ultimately, I think that it totally it hit the themes of Scripture very, very pointedly.
Yeah, especially, and this is why I wanted to talk through it, because so much of this debate is on Facebook, it's posts, it's back and forth. We've sat here, we've talked, I'm even more comfortable saying that now, having discussed it with the two of you, than I was before. Yeah. And it's not it's certainly not the movie you go, here, go watch this, right, and just ignore the person. But as a discussion point, as something to stimulate thinking and critical thinking and self-reflection and examination for anyone, because anyone who feels an inkling of, what we call self-righteousness, but really it's just superiority, being high on yourself, as a person, and thinking, like you said, thinking of themselves as a good person, should watch this film and wrestle with what what does that mean
Mm-hmm.
to be a good person?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and in God's eyes, what does that mean? And
Right.
if you want to justify yourself before your creator,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And is it possible?
Yeah.
You know, I think it's not possible to justify yourself before your creator on your own. That's what I believe.
Right.
The more that people are Bible aware, both religious and non-religious people, evangelicals and non-evangelicals, the better I think it is. I am glad that this movie's out. I'm glad that it's titled Noah. I'm glad that people like Joseph Gordon-Levitt are going and reading Genesis. I mean, seriously, like, would he have read Genesis apart from this movie? I don't know. Is that reading of Genesis going to have an impact in his life? I don't know. But I do know that it says that the Word of God will never return void. And I think even in this case, as being a source material for the movie, that it's not going to return void, and that there will be an impact on people's thoughts, as Daniel had mentioned, both, you know, Christians and non-Christians and different religious beliefs. I think everybody needs to see it just to wrestle with the idea of what is man, what are we born as, what is God, and what do we have to do? We have to walk with the Creator. That's the bottom line, is that, you know, if we're not walking with the Creator as Adam did in the garden, then we will always have a big, huge discrepancy between us and God.
The film is contributing to a national conversation. I wish that conversation was between believers and non-believers. It's not. It's between believers and believers arguing about the movie and whether it's blasphemous to go see it. And, you know, and I, by the way, I don't think anybody who really feels uncomfortable, like, with the idea of seeing this movie because they're afraid of something, you shouldn't see it. I mean, like, you should never do anything that you have moral questions about for yourself. I don't want anyone to watch this and like, against their better judgment, you know, do something. You know, if we've convinced you that it's okay to see this movie, and I would like to think maybe we have, then please go see the movie. But, you know, don't violate your conscience, whatever you're doing. There's a conversation between believers and believers, and there's a conversation between non-believers about us, you know, sort of talking about how we don't seem to like the movie, and, you know, they're just kind of fighting about it and what's going on. And maybe that'll be helpful. I mean, certainly, like you said, Levitt was obviously thinking, what's the big deal? Like, what's going on with this movie? You know, like, what's this buzz about? I'm going to go see the movie, and this is interesting. I'm going to open this up. I want to see what this is about, you know. And maybe this sort of debate that's going on is actually fueling that. You know, maybe if we were just friendlily going to our neighbors and talking, they'd be like, you know, not a big deal. But because we're fighting about it, it's like interesting, you know? So, like, if that's the case.
Yeah. What's the nature of controversy? It always draws attention to whatever the controversy is about. So, I mean.
So wouldn't that go back to the idea of the sovereignty of God?
Yes, it would. I mean, like, this was the best thing that can happen. I mean, I wouldn't be hosting this if it wasn't a controversy. Like, that would, I wouldn't happen, you know? So it's like, there is an element of that as well. So, you know, I don't want to condemn something too strongly if it in fact is having a good result. But I would like it, at least, if we must have this debate.
Well, the debate, the discussion should be done in brotherly affection, in the spirit of Christ, amongst Christians. And so if that's not happening, if people are, you know, questioning your faith for seeing this movie, well, that's not right either. You know, I think if you're going to form a judgment or an opinion about this movie, you need to see it for yourself and not just base your opinion on reviews or whatnot. I think that obviously there are varied perspectives on this film, and if you want to contribute to that debate, then you should see it yourself. So
yeah, I agree. Definitely watch the movie if you want to engage in the debate. Engage in the debate in a Christ-like manner. You know, respectfully. You know, be firm, be strong. You know, you believe. Express your beliefs, but do so in a loving and charitable way. Yeah,
definitely.
Well, thank you for watching. This has been great. I'm looking forward to getting this out there, and feel free to comment in the comment section of this video or on the Looking for Overland blog. I hope this will stimulate extensive discussion and debate. So, have a good night.